my webcam now. So hopefully everyone can hear me and everyone can see the slides also on the screen. So Philip, is the slides okay? I just switched to the next slide. I just want to make sure that it's good. All right. So just a bit about myself. I'm based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I'm Vice Chancellor of Global Next University, and I'm also an academician. My area of interest is in primarily in IT and leadership, with a special focus on IT outsourcing and strategy. I have a PhD in computer science in 1994, graduated from King's College, which is part of University of London in the UK. As an academic, I've published quite heavily in a number of different journals and conferences. As I mentioned, my focus is on leadership issues, particularly at the strategic level, what I call CIO, Chief Information Officer. And I'm generally interested in a wide range of leadership issues. Obviously, leadership and management is quite a complex area these days. If you study on any MBA program, there is a whole host of leadership frameworks and theories that you have to deal with. Before I joined academia, I was involved in consulting, worked for a number of companies, including Accenture, Logica, and ICL. Basically, I was based in London and did most of my consulting there, but I've traveled extensively quite a lot. So that was my past career before I joined academia on a full-time basis there. So that's just a bit about myself. Okay, so great leaders. I don't know if you can name the great leaders. Perhaps you can type in the chat window those that you can recognize. I'm sure you recognize the individual on the left, pretty much the founder of India independence. The second person is also quite famous. I'm sure you know him. If you own an iPad or iPhone, that's the guy who started it all off. There's a lady also that some of you may know of, probably most of you, Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister of the UK, known as the Iron Lady, actually. She was known as the Iron Lady. And that, I guess, is a reflection of her particular management style. Barack Obama, of course, US President, and also a great leader, and communicates extremely well. If you listen to his oral delivery of speeches, he's really natural in terms of his communication skills there. Philip, a few of the participants are saying they don't have any audio. So I'll just pause a while and let me just maybe the participants, I mean, if you can hear me on the audio, could you just give me a tick? There's a green tick at the bottom left-hand corner. I just want to make sure that you can hear me okay. Okay, so there's a bit of advice there in the chat window. If you are having problems with audio, go to the top left navigation there. Please click on audio. Please then click on integrate voice conference and then join audio. So I'll just give people a minute or two, just those that can't hear me, at least they can go to the chat window and click there. Okay, so some people can hear me, some people cannot hear me. Okay. Okay. Philip, we seem to have lost the PowerPoint text. Oh, there you go. Sorry. Okay. All right. Go back, forward. Okay. So I'll just continue. The session is recorded, and for those of you who are having difficulties with the audio, we will make the recording available to you. So even though the session may be of limited value, we'll make sure that the recording gets to you. Yeah. So let's just go ahead in the interest of time. So Barack Obama, obviously a great leader. The next person, you may or may not know this individual. This is Lee Kuan Yew. He's the founding father of Singapore and passed away recently, unfortunately. But obviously a great leader and really did a lot of good things for Singapore as well. Now, the person, okay, so I just want to make sure. Okay, let me just do a quick check. The PowerPoint should be visible and the audio should be visible. So it seems to be working on this side, but it seems some of you may not be able to hear me clearly. So I think most of you can actually see the PowerPoint and also the audio. Yeah. Okay. So the last person is a individual leader from the sports world. I don't know if you recognize this figure. This is actually someone called Sir Alex Ferguson. He was the manager of a football team called Man United. He's actually has pretty much the best record as a manager in English football and won numerous titles for Man United. So he's actually someone from the sports world. So the question that I want to pose is, do these people all follow the same leadership style? Probably not. If you look at Gandhi, for example, probably very different from someone like Steve Jobs and Alex Ferguson, different personalities. Second question is, did they face the same set of leadership challenges? Did they face the same set of leadership challenges? And obviously they didn't. Gandhi was going for Indian independence. Steve Jobs was trying to break into new markets for Apple's products. Margaret Thatcher was trying to manage a whole host of issues to do with the UK. And Barack Obama, very much a global leader, very much focused on global issues. Lee Kuan Yew, he's been criticized for being an authoritarian, very strong style of leadership, no nonsense kind of individual. And Alex Ferguson, also known as a very tough individual, spoke his mind, definitely not the kind of people person that you might think about, but basically a very, very strong leader and delivered very, very strong results. So these people, they had different leadership styles. They faced different sets of leadership challenges. But having said that, they did possess or develop the required leadership skills for the challenges that they faced in their own particular situation. And I guess the key learning here is that there is no single style of leadership. You might be required to apply different styles or approaches depending upon the individual context and situation. So what's the difference between a leader and a manager? This is one of those very, very common questions that is often asked. And I think this picture basically is a good representation of the difference there. So a manager or a boss is someone who basically is at the top and shouts that they are at the top, and other people are down below trying to get to the top. Whereas a leader is someone who's above, but also trying to help those individuals below him or her. And that's essentially the difference between the two. So a nice kind of quote from Bennis and Nanas that I really like is, managers do things right, but leaders do the right things. So if you're a good manager, that doesn't necessarily make you a good leader, and vice versa. Good leaders aren't necessarily good managers. So there's a difference between leadership and management. So let's think about leadership as organizational alignment, and think about the picture on the left there. This represents what happens when people are not aligned. And when people are not aligned, they tend to work in different directions. They tend to conflict in terms of what they're doing. Things don't get done because there's disarray. And this is basically what it's like when there's no organizational alignment. One of the defining qualities of a leader is to achieve a high level of organizational alignment. And what does that look like? Well, if you look at the picture on the right, I think that's a very good representation of organizational alignment. If you watch Formula One, and the cars, as they're going round, they make these pit stops, and obviously you want to do your pit stop as quickly as possible, yeah. And that's why you have these very, very well-aligned teams. Different teams look at different parts. They do a very, very specialized job. They do it very, very quickly. And everything is aligned. Everything works together. Everything flows together. So the whole organization, the whole set of teams, they're all helping each other achieve that ultimate objective. And that's a good demonstration of organizational alignment. So think about that as one of the defining features of leadership. So Peter Drucker is also very strong in terms of his views on alignment. He wrote a book in the mid-50s called The Practice of Management, and he conceived this concept called management by objectives, MBO, management by objectives. And the whole idea of MBO was to get alignment from the very top of the organization all the way down to what people do on an individual basis. And this was his main kind of philosophy for making sure organizations were aligned. You start at the top with organizational objectives. You then break that down into divisional objectives. You then break that down further into departmental objectives, and then ultimately individual objectives. So even people at the individual level, they know how their job is aligned to the organization. So that's kind of Peter Drucker's view, organizational alignment. People don't talk too much about management by objectives today, but if you look at the literature, if you look at how people do, if you look at the modern management practices, a lot of that is derived from the MBO concept. So if you go to any MBA program, actually the leadership literature is quite vast. There are so many journals, articles on it that you could spend forever reading about leadership literature. Just to dissect the literature, there are various kind of aspects of leadership that typically management schools will talk about. For example, they'll talk about the traits of a leader, the qualities of a leader. That's one area. They'll talk about the functions of a leader. what they call the leadership function. What is a leader meant to actually do? They'll also talk about leadership styles, and I alluded to this earlier, the styles of leadership that different people have. Not everyone has a single leadership style. Not every leadership style works in every leadership situation. And we also talk about leadership based on situation and context. People talk about situational leadership. Given a particular situation, what is the right leadership actions to do in that scenario? Yeah. And then people have recently talked about transformation and innovation in leadership, particularly in a world which is very dynamic. The whole idea of leadership is to help transform people and transform organizations. And that is pretty much what transformational leadership is all about. And of course, every company, every organization needs to innovate. So people are now talking about the relationship between innovation, creativity, and the role that plays in leadership. So that's pretty much a summary of the leadership literature in a single slide. So actually, there's quite an interesting book which came out many, many years ago by Stephen Covey, and it's called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I don't know if you've come across this book, but very, very interesting, down-to-earth book. You can tell by the number of copies that it sold, very, very popular. Actually, the great thing about this book is that it breaks down what people do, what effective people do, into 7 very essential habits. And the habits are what I've shown there on the slide. Number 1 is to be proactive. You know, highly effective people are generally very, very proactive. Secondly, they begin with the end point in mind. So they think about their goals and objectives, what they want to achieve, and they actually start from that particular point. They are able to prioritize, and you know, given the modern work that we all face as professionals, there are 100 and different projects always floating around, but highly effective people actually learn to prioritize. The other thing that people do is think win-win, and this is important in any kind of business partnership. Traditionally, we always think in terms of, I'm going to win, you're going to lose, I'm going to win, you're going to lose, particularly when we talk about competitors and business partners. You always want to try and get the most out of whoever you're working with, whereas highly effective people think more in terms of win-win. Seek first to understand and then be understood. Think about, the good leaders are people who listen. Yeah, they'll listen to others before they actually talk about their own ideas. They'll listen to others, and that's what effective people do. They kind of try and understand. They try and listen. They actively listen before they present their own ideas. And synergize, working together as a team, working effectively with very diverse teams. That's basically one of the key habits. And then finally, sharpen the straw, which is represented by continuous improvement. So trying to balance, trying to optimize, trying to refresh, and trying to renew. That's all part of continuous improvement. So actually what Covey did, he basically distilled the entire literature. He talked to so many different people. He basically distilled everything down into these 7 very important habits. And my goal in this webinar is to do the same. I'm going to try and distill leadership into a number of everyday habits that you as a professional can try and subscribe to, try and build into what you do, trying to develop habits, basically, for you to become effective leaders going forward. How am I going to do that? Yeah, how am I going to break down these habits for you? So what I thought I'd do is, as a starting point, as the first in this webinar, is I'm going to talk about a case study that Harvard Business did, and the case study is of Steve Jobs. And I think Steve Jobs, being a modern day leader, I think he's a very, very good case study to actually work on. So based on this case study, I'll talk about the case study, I'll talk about the lessons from it, and after that I'll try and summarize the key leadership habits of Steve Jobs. And hopefully this is something that you can take away and you can start applying it in your everyday practice. Now, why is this a very good case study and why Steve Jobs? Well, actually, Steve Jobs had a very distinct approach to leadership. And I think a lot of what came out of the Steve Jobs case study was basically there are things that, seem to fly against traditional views of management. For example, one of the views of leadership is that, look, we should try and be nice to people. We should try and listen to them and understand them and, try and nurture and develop them. Very much a people development approach. Whereas Steve Jobs, if you look at the case study and what he did with his team, he was actually very, very rough on people to the point where he was shouting and he bullied, and he was very critical of his people. And some people actually felt brutalized working with Steve Jobs. Some people felt that they just couldn't take it anymore, and he had the impression of being a very brutal manager. But if you look at the flip side of that, you can look at the team that he created at Apple, and you can look at what they've achieved. He said, look at the results, look at what Apple has achieved. He said any of his leadership team could have actually taken a top job at any other kind of company, but they didn't. They decided to stay at Apple. So, you think about that. He was so brutal to them, and yet, they stayed with it, and the results were, phenomenal, basically. Steve Jobs was also asked another question: what's your most important creation? And you'd think that the answer would be, iPhone or iPad or something like that. Whereas his response is the most important creation was actually Apple, the company itself. Making a company that could withstand the test of time was actually far more challenging than making any kind of great product. And I think, the fact that Apple has just grown and grown after Steve Jobs has died, it's it's expanded. Company has really kind of continued on that growth path. I think that's testimony to that. Many people were critical and saying, look, without Steve Jobs, you don't have innovation anymore. So it's very clear that Apple is continuing to innovate and grow even without Steve Jobs. And again, I think that's a very, very good quality and point of learning. From the case study, there are actually 14 lessons in total. I don't want to go through every single lesson, but there are 14 lessons in total that came out of the study with Steve Jobs. I'm going to go through a few of the lessons right now. So one of the lessons is to focus. Now, the story of Steve Jobs is that he started Apple, but then he was ousted out of Apple, and eventually he returned to Apple in 1997. And when he returned back to Apple, Apple was making a wide variety of different products and peripherals, and the product range was just pretty huge, but very random. There was no consistency. And Steve Jobs says, look, this isn't working. And basically he drew a matrix and he said, look, there are 4 quadrants. Our market is represented by 4 quadrants. One is a pro market and the other is a consumer market. And within that, there are 2 types of products. There are desktop products and there are portable products. And he said, look, we're only going to build 4 products. one product in each quadrant. That's all we're going to do. And the main lesson there is that deciding what not to do is just as important as deciding what to do. So a lot of the strategic management literature now talks about focus and focusing your efforts on particular products or particular niches or particular segments. You can't do too much as an organization, else you just become overburdened and you'll lose focus. The second lesson is don't be a slave to focus groups. And I think there's a broader kind of lesson to be learned here. Example is Henry Ford, who obviously invented the motor car. And he said, look, if Henry Ford asked his customers what they wanted, they would have said, I want a faster horse. Because in those days, traveling was done on horseback, and there was no such thing as a car. So customers didn't even envisage, didn't even have a conception of what a car was. So they didn't really understand. And if you asked them, they would have replied, they simply want a faster horse. So Steve Jobs was also of that same philosophy when it came to product development. He relied a lot on instinct and intuition about the desires of consumers. And he used that to actually develop and conceive his products. And sometimes he was looking far beyond what anyone else was thinking, looking into the future. So don't simply be reactive to your clients or customers. Don't have a knee-jerk response. Try and think further ahead. Try and look to the future. What do my clients want or need in the next 2 or 4 years rather than today? Lesson 3 is bend reality. And the story here is that when Steve Jobs first built Apple with Steve Wozniak, they were partners basically. They met at university. When they decided to start the company, Steve Jobs was interested in this game called Breakout. And I'm sure you're familiar with this game. You have this kind of a ball that goes up and down the screen, and you have a paddle at the bottom, and you actually break parts of the wall using the ball. And Steve Jobs asked Steve Wozniak to write this game for the Apple computer. And Steve Wozniak looked at that and said, hey, it's going to take me a few months to write this game. Steve Jobs turned around and said, basically, I want you to write this game in 4 days. Now, Steve Wozniak actually knew that this was not possible, but, lo and behold, he actually managed to write this game in 4 days. And this is how Steve Jobs actually kind of distorted reality. People might say this is bullying, this is lying, this is setting unrealistic goals. But, Steve Jobs really pushed people to do things that they thought were impossible. And basically, he took them to the next level in terms of their performance and abilities. And there are a few cases where he's done that. Other instances where he's worked with companies, for example, to produce Gorilla Glass, the hard glass that iPhones and iPads are made out of in terms of production volumes. But basically, he's getting the best out of people. He's asking them to think less about what they think is possible and really take them to the next level. The fourth lesson is that the packaging and the presentation plays a very, very influential role on people. And some people may say, look, this is form over substance, but actually, if you look at great leaders, they also have an aura of leadership. They also present themselves as leaders. And being able to present yourself, being able to present your organization, being able to present your products and services, being able to do those well, that does have an influence on your clients and potential customers. That's why Steve Jobs actually spent a lot of time on the packaging for the iPhone. Yeah, he wanted people to, he didn't want to spoil the product by giving some poor packaging. He knew that the whole idea of the product was to build the product, the whole quality aura, and that included the packaging as well as the shops. If you go to an Apple shop, you'll know that it's designed in a particular way. There's a lot of thought process there. So lesson 4 was impute. Do understand that presentation, positioning is very, very important. Form is just as important as substance. Lesson 6, very, very important, tolerate only A players. And I think you know who this guy is. He is pretty much an A player, basically. Now, if you look at the case study, this part is quite interesting. He says that, he referred to this situation called the bozo explosion. And what he meant was that, look, a lot of organizations have managers that are very polite and but very mediocre. They do their job well, they're average performers, and they're polite, they do their job, they get things done, but they're not an A player. At best, they're a B player, and they're probably a C player. And they're going to produce average work with average results and have average performance. And Steve Jobs says, look, if I'm going to bring Apple and be the best company in the world to do the things that I want to do to implement the vision, I really need A players. So basically, if you weren't an A player, he said it to your face. And if you didn't perform, if a job wasn't done right, he was pretty brutal about that. He would be very, very honest. And sometimes as leaders, we don't want to hurt people's feelings, We're saying, look, let's be considerate, let's try and tell them in a nice way, etc. Whereas Steve Jobs really had the opposite approach. And you might feel that, look, this is very demotivating for an employee. But, for an A player, the opposite was true. His so-called rudeness and his roughness was actually coupled by the ability to inspire. Yeah, he actually inspired people. He actually made them believe that they were able to accomplish the goals that he set out. And he knew that because these were A players, not the B players, not the C players. So if you think about leadership, building a leadership team, really you should tolerate only A players. So basically, those are 6 of the key lessons that Steve Jobs really kind of came out of this case study. And I kind of reviewed the case study myself. I reviewed a lot of the literature around Steve Jobs, and obviously great character to study as a leadership example. And these are the key habits that I learned myself from this case study. And these are the leadership habits that I want you to think about and to develop as well, to try and build in to your own way of leadership. Number 1 is have a clear focus on what your goals are. Yeah. Think about what you're trying to achieve. As leaders, sometimes we don't have a clear vision. Sometimes we don't have a clear objective. We're just kind of going through the motions. We're just trying to get by the day, get by the week. We're just trying to get by. We don't really have a strong goal for what we're trying to do. So the number 1 leadership habit is to have a very strong focus. Number 2 is to simplify where you can. Get rid of unnecessary complexity. As I mentioned, Steve Jobs, when he rejoined Apple, there was too much diversity in the product portfolio. He decided to simplify it. Even to this day, when you buy an iPhone, there are generally only a very small set of choices. So the Apple product portfolio is generally very, very small. I see that in organizations generally there's a lot of complexity. There's political complexity. There's organizational complexity. There are workflow and process complexity. People build that into how people work. You know, a lot of complexity is unnecessary. Yeah. So where you can simplify, I think a good leader tries to simplify life, not to make it too complex. The third habit is to know the business and the competition. And this is where a leader can really value add to the organization. You know, a lot of the times we have leaders who are charismatic, who, you know, work well with teams, who are very people and talent oriented. They have strong communication skills, but they don't really understand the business. They don't really have any innovation to add to the business. They don't have any contribution to make in terms of new products or services for how to get ahead of the competition. You know, so I think those kind of leaders are very, very not ideal. Learning from Steve Jobs, he knew exactly what his competitors were going to do. He knew intimately what the landscape was, what the industry was about. He knew the kind of products he wanted to launch and develop. So you can't be a leader and not know about the business or competition. The fourth lesson, the fourth habit is product and service first, then profits. You know, in this current leadership age, we talk about finance a lot. We talk about profits a lot. Sometimes that becomes the objective, whereas actually you should think about the product or services that you're offering clients and customers. And if you get that right, then the profits will follow. So often what we teach people is the reverse. Generate profits, rather than think about the products and services. So I think that's an important habit that we should adopt as a leader. Number 5, push your people to greater heights. Not just push your people. Yeah, it's not about incremental improvements, but really radical quantum leap improvements, pushing people to greater heights. Okay, Philip, I seem to have lost the presentation. I don't know if you can give me back the slides. Philip, are you there? Seem to have lost the slides.
Yes, Prof. Just give me a minute. I'm uploading it again.
Okay. Sorry about the delay. Actually, it was my last slide, so hopefully it will be back on. A bit of patience, please. Okay. All right. So let me try and get back to where I was. Okay. Okay, there we go. So actually number 6, sorry, I think I lost the number in there. It's come back to 1 or 2. Number 6, surround yourself with the best talent. I think a good leader is someone who builds a good leadership team and also thinks about future leaders as well. There is no value actually surrounding yourself with mediocre talent because you're always teaching them, you won't learn from them. As a professor, actually, one of the things that very good professors do is surround themselves with very bright PhD students because you learn a lot more by surrounding yourself with people who are bright, even brighter than you, because that's how you learn and develop and grow. So don't be scared as a leader to surround yourself with people who may be intellectually more superior than you, who have better ideas than you, who manage teams better than you. Everyone has strong and weak aspects. So as a leader, don't be afraid of that. Try and build, try and exploit on the leadership talents that you have. And finally, understand the big and small picture. Yeah. One of the criticisms of leaders is that they're too high level. They're 1,000 feet above. They don't understand what's happening on the ground. I think that's very, very valid in large organizations these days. But if you look at Steve Jobs, he understood everything from the big picture to the small picture. All these prototypes of Apple products, he spent, days using them himself, using the products himself, giving feedback. Yeah. He was intimately involved in strategic as well as operational issues. And he was a leader who basically spanned the entire levels of an organization. And again, I think that's a very good leadership habit. Let's not get lost in the high-level stuff. Let's make sure that we know what's happening on the ground there. So these are the 7 leadership habits that I've kind of analyzed from Steve Jobs and the case studies. And hopefully these habits are things which are useful to you, things that resonate with you, and things that you can apply going forward as a leader. So I want to thank you for your attention. Basically, just to let you know that the university does work with a number of different corporations. We do develop a number of executive programs, and we do develop a lot of leadership programs for a range of organizations there. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll open the session for any questions that people might have. And there are 2 ways in which you can ask your question. You can ask for the microphone if you have a headset, or you can type your question into the chat box, and I will try and answer your question there. So if you want the microphone, you can raise your hand. There's a raise hand icon in the bottom left-hand corner, and I can give you the microphone, or you can type your question in the chat box. So let's see. So I think there are hands raised. I'll try and give you the microphone. Okay. So just a moment, I will see who has their hand raised. Okay, Philip, could you give the microphone? I think Narendra has their hand raised. I don't know if you can unmute. Okay, Narendra, you have the microphone. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I have one question. I'm in the IT field, and most of the time when I want to do certain things right, but my boss always goes down to saying that go and ask the people whether they wanted this or not. And most of the time I'm afraid they are not even knowing what the things we wanted to do it.
Yeah.
So how do I resolve this case?
Yeah, good question, Narendra. I think it goes back to the learning. I mean, with Steve Jobs, he wasn't so enslaved with these focus groups. And as an organization, obviously, clients and customers are important. And often people will say, look, speak to the client, speak to your customers, see what they want, do a needs analysis, etc. I think that's okay. The customer or the client will give you immediate day-to-day feedback. on what they want. But I think as leaders, we also need to see beyond that. We need to think about how the market will change in 2 to 5 years, what new requirements customers may have in 2 to 5 years. Customers and clients cannot always articulate what they want in 2 to 5 years. They only see what they want on a day-by-day basis. But I think a leader has to combine both things. They have to be far-sighted and envisaging what will be required in the future, and they also have to combine that with day-to-day knowledge about customer and clients. So I would say to your boss, okay, boss, fine, let me speak to important clients and customers, but let me also think about what they might require in the future so that we can start thinking about relevant products and services that we want to offer to them in the future. So I think that's how I would answer that particular question.
I got some points. Okay, thank you, Doctor.
Okay, thanks, Narendra. Now let's see who else. I think procedure. So I'll give you the microphone. Procedure. Okay. Now let's move on. Let's see who else. I think procedure may be typing something there. Okay. Okay. Can't see anymore. Let me try and go to the chat window and take a few questions there. Okay. Okay. There's a question. I'll just read the first one at the bottom. Sorry, the latest question. Question is, sometimes being honest can be perceived as harsh, like in the case of jobs. That's true. How does one alter that perception, as in be honest and not seem harsh? That's a question from Teja Sweeney. Hope I got the name right there. I think there's a good question. We want to be honest, but sometimes we don't want to be seen as being too harsh. I think the answer there is to provide constructive feedback. Being constructive means that you tell the truth, but you also tell them what they can do to improve upon a situation, i.e., you're giving them constructive advice. I think when you give people constructive advice, when you present things in a positive way, when you tell them how they can improve on their idea, I think that's how you can help them, and that's how you can give them feedback that it's going to be more constructive to them. That's I think is what's important there. I think whenever we give feedback in performance appraisals, for example, you should never say to someone, "You're no good in this area. You're no good in that area," and just leave it as that. You might say to someone, "Look, what you can do is improve on your skills in this particular area. Why don't you look at these few things? Why don't you try these few things?" And then maybe in a few weeks' time, we'll come back and we'll discuss it and discuss how you feel about it. So that's an example of how you can be a bit more constructive there. So I think providing constructive feedback is my answer there. But be honest. Don't shy away from being honest. So there's another question also from Madan. In the current IT industry, there is a reward crunch. For every 10 excellent working people, we only have 4 slots of good reward, and the 6 people have to be disappointed. In these circumstances, when the management hasn't left you many options to probably work, how can a person be a good leader? Well, a good leader, number one is reward is only one aspect. Financial reward, should I say, is only one aspect of reward. In fact, I know it's an important aspect, but if you look at some of the surveys on employee satisfaction, there are other ways to reward employees. You might have a mentoring session with your individual employees. That's a reward. You might put them on training and development. You might give them a certificate without any finance. You might publicly congratulate someone. You might help them have a breakfast with the CEO. You might give them a pat on the back. You might spend time with them on a one-to-one level. There are other ways to reward your employees aside from the finances. The other thing that I would do as a leader is, if you disagree with that, you should go back to HR. You should go back to your senior managers and say, look, I want to reward everyone. Everyone who's performed well, I want to reward. It's okay, I'll divide the reward down into equal units if required. But look, I don't agree with giving only a few people some reward. So 2 answers. Number 1 is, if you disagree with something strongly, tell someone about it. Number 2 is, think about rewards as much broader than just financial rewards. Even in large organizations, if you feel there's growth in your career, if you feel there's opportunities for you to do new exciting projects, if you have a say over your career path, that is worth a lot more than a financial reward in many cases. Okay, there's a question from Akash. Lack of accomplishment in organizations is due to lack of authenticity. A lack of realism is often the reason of failure in organizations. Perhaps, I think as a leader, you should always be genuine. You cannot be a good leader and you cannot act to be a good leader. You cannot, if you're not a good leader, you can't act it out. Yeah, you can't be in an organization and continue to act. You got to be who you are. So if I go back to leadership styles, everyone has a leadership style. You should not try and be someone that you're not. You should not try and adopt a leadership style which is very unnatural for you. If you're not a great public speaker, obviously you can always improve your public speaking. But if that is not a strong point, if your strong point is maybe collaboration, you should do more of what you're strong at. Not to say that you shouldn't improve the areas that you're slightly weak at, but you got to be authentic as a leader. And I think if you're authentic, you're genuine, I think people will see that as you being you, and they'll appreciate and respect that a lot more. Yeah. A question from Rana. A good leader should follow the intuition and instincts. However, in a customer-centric service industry, if you go with intuition, your customer might get upset. Decision may be or may not be correct. I believe intuition could work for long-term strategy. Intuition can be given a shape for longer-term strategy. What are your thoughts? I think intuition works at all levels, actually, Rana. I think it works at the operational level as well. I think if a customer is upset, it means that you haven't shared your intuition with them and you haven't sold them on why you think going a particular direction is the right one. When I speak to clients or customers, if you have ideas or intuitions that you want to use in a particular client engagement, obviously you'd share that with the client. You tell them the benefits, you tell them the rationale. And if they're upset, it's because they haven't been consulted, or you've consulted them and you've ignored them. So, clients and customers can also be a sounding block for your intuition. So try and integrate them inside that process. Let's see. Okay, so a question from Prabhu. In IT, the majority is driven by financial aspects. Yeah, look, this is a comment that I talked about earlier. This is one of the habits that I think we should try and reframe, because you can only be financially successful if your product or service is excellent. Yeah, I mean, let's not kid ourselves there. The only reason why companies are the very good companies that do extremely well is because they have great products and services. Yeah. So you've got to have a great product or service before you can achieve greater profits. So yes, there are companies who make a profit and are driven by profits and are driven by share value. And, that is the nature of how you evaluate companies, how the finance industry works, how funding is raised. A lot of things revolve around finance, but to get to a healthy financial position, the only way you can do that is by having strong products and services. Now, very, very good examples in business environment. You look at companies like Nokia and BlackBerry. 10 years ago, you'd say, look, Nokia is the greatest phone maker in the world. Yeah, everyone has a Nokia phone. Yeah, where is Nokia today? Yeah, Nokia today has very poor financial position. In fact, eventually taken over by Microsoft. Why did its financial position deteriorate so badly? It's because its products weren't relevant to the market anymore. Yeah, people like Apple and Samsung started to make a lot better products, a lot better phones, and nobody started to use. People started to move off Nokia. So this, for example, is a classic case study. Yeah, very good example of how financial positions deteriorated over a very short space of time because the product or service is no longer relevant or excellent in terms of market needs and requirements there. Okay, so if someone mentions that, please recount the story. Let's see, any other questions? Okay, interesting question here from Suresh. In the current IT industry, we are appreciating only smart projection people rather than good technical and projection people. How to handle this? What will be the impact? Change companies. Yeah, that's the first thought that comes to mind. Companies value people. They should value technical people at an equal level. When I was working in the consulting industry, one of the companies that I worked for was, I didn't work for, I worked with Oracle. And Oracle UK, what they did was they had two career paths. They basically had a technical career path and they had a managerial career path. And basically, even if you were a technical person, you could rise up the ranks and take a very senior position. So, if you don't feel valued as a technical person, then there may be something, an issue with the organization and with the structure within that organization. But if you're a technology company, you need very good technical people. You need them because they're going to deliver the product and service at the end of the day. Therefore, they should be very highly valued within the organization. Now, I will actually add an extra addition here, perspective here, because the best technical people are also very good leaders as well. So they communicate very well, they work with clients very well, they interact very well, they talk with the CEOs and other senior people very well. Technical people, the best technical people, also have very good interaction, social collaboration skills as well. So, I think any organization should value these technical people, particularly if you're an IT company where technology is, of course, very, very important. So a question from Sunil: how do you see leadership evolving with new technologies? Well, people talk about virtual organizations these days. You have large companies and people like companies are spread across the globe. Companies are no longer located within a single physical area. Companies like Microsoft, IBM, Accenture, Coke, General Electric, they're spread across the globe. So if you're the CEO of Pepsi, how do you manage a disparate organization? So I think technology can play a role there. I don't think we can manage by technology. I think the technology can certainly play a role there. So I think managing a virtual organization, looking at how technology can help you do that. I don't think it changes the basic substance of leadership. But if you're a leader who can use technology to communicate, to connect, I think that's a very, very positive thing. And I think you should make use of that kind of technology. For example, I have a lot of meetings which are done electronically, virtually, via web conferencing. You learn how to use that technology to your advantage. Okay, so a question from Vishal. Being a leader, how can I get more work from my team members in that case? I know they have more capability, they can do more, but they don't do that. Well, you know, you got to push them. You got to set goals for them. You can't let them get too relaxed. You got to challenge them, and you got to reward them. So if you can set them a challenging activity, a challenging piece of work, and say, look, I'm going to set you a series of challenges. If you manage to complete those challenges, I'm going to give you some kind of reward. And again, it doesn't have to be a financial reward, but you can't be too soft on people. That's not the right thing, yeah? Don't confuse this with being nice to people. Yeah, you can be nice to people, but you can still challenge them. And we sometimes want to be friendly with people. We try and, we don't want to upset them, etc. But I go back to the lesson of Steve Jobs: tolerate only A players. If you have a great leadership team, if you have very good players, A players, then you should push and challenge those people. If you have your B players or your D players, okay, fair enough. They're not really going to perform to an extraordinary level, but you should always challenge people, you should always push people, and you should always give them reasons why. Why should they do this? What's in it for them? What's their goal in mind? How's it going to benefit them? Not everyone is of the same caliber, so just bear that in mind. But if you have somebody who's good, who's an A player or potentially an A player, look, you have an opportunity to develop that individual. And if you as a leader can develop future leaders, that's obviously something that's very, very positive. Okay, I'll take one more question because we're pretty much out of time. And last question is, okay, let me just try and, let me finish off with this question on situational leadership. Does situational leadership actually exist? Can someone be a leader in one situation and not in another? Actually, I think the notion of situational leadership is a bit different. What we mean by situational leadership is in any given situation, what leadership actions to apply to get the best result from that outcome. So it's not about being a leader in one situation and not being a leader in another situation. It's more about, given a variety of different leadership challenges that you face, can you adapt your leadership style in order to address that challenge? For example, managing a 60,000 employee organization may be quite different from managing a 100-person organization. Managing an organization in a startup phase is very different from managing an organization with a mature product. Managing an organization that's located in East Asia might be very different culturally from managing an organization based in North America. Yeah, managing an organization with a mediocre set of other leaders might be very different from managing an organization with no real leaders. Yeah, so every situation is different. different organizational DNA, different cultures, different products, different organizational maturity stages. You know, the whole context is going to be different. So can you adapt to all these different situations? That's what we mean by situational leadership, being able to handle a variety of different situations. Okay. So basically, I'm just going to leave my email on the chat window. So, okay. That's my email there. Again, I'll thank everyone for their attention. And obviously, if you want to know more about leadership aspect, we'll be having a series of webinar sessions. A variety of different professors from the university will be presenting on a variety of different management and leadership topics. Do remember to join in for the next session. And I think you will gain a lot from these sessions as an individual. I hope the habits that I've given you have been useful to you as an individual. You can take away something that's relevant and meaningful, and I hope you have gained from this particular session. So thanks, everyone. For those who had some audio issues, I apologize, and we will definitely make sure that the recording of this session gets to you, and you can look at that recording in your own time as well. So thank you, everyone, for your kind attention today, and good afternoon, and bye from me. Thanks, everyone.